Forbs, not
weed.
weed,
No weed?
but Forbs.
Okay, so I came and talked to you all a couple of years ago. See a few familiar faces that were here. It was shortly after I started. I've been with OSU for about 3.5 years. And I was thinking when I was driving here this morning, and I've thought this before, I almost wish when you first start, they just wouldn't let you talk to anyone for a couple of years. Because even though, yes, you were in college for 10 years and you have this degree, you usually move to a new state and you move to new crops and you just don't know what's going on until you've lived in the area and you start doing some research and collecting data. So hopefully I know a little bit more than the last time we talked. I know that from the first time we did meet that there are a lot of forage folks in the room. I'm mostly focused in wheat, but I will at the end talk a little bit about Johnson grass control in Bermuda. I'm sure you guys know Alex Rocatelli, who's our forage specialist. I'm trying to work with him more on the weed side, but my primary focus of my research program is weed control in wheat. So all I really have on the agenda is talking a little bit about broadleaf management, and then I am going to talk a little bit about grass management in wheat as well. I know that's not important to everyone, especially if we're talking about forage, but to some it is, so I'll spend just a little bit of time on that and then go into some of the data that we've collected on Johnson grass management in Bermuda. How does that sound? Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So when I first mentioned broadleaf weed management in wheat, I think back to this last growing season. Who drove around and saw a lot of green horseweed and mare's tail in their wheat at harvest? We all saw those fields all over the state. We had a lot of rain in the spring. That brings that flush of many of our summer annuals. Horseweed or mare's tail, it's really a winter annual or a summer annual. We can have it come up in the winter. You may already see rosettes on the ground, but we also have many biotypes in Oklahoma that germinate later, depending on primarily what we grow. Our weeds adapt to our crop cycle. So I always get calls around harvest. What can I spray in my wheat crop to burn down some of that green matter that I have? Maybe it's horseweed, maybe it's pigweed, maybe it's bindweed. And I hope that the takeaway from this slide is no matter what we were applying, we weren't really getting more than, the highest there is 80% control, but a lot of it's around that 50%. And many of those treatments are getting kind of pricey if we look at these tank mixes. Roundup, Ally, 2,4-D, that's kind of a traditional harvest aid that we like in the area. So I'm hoping before we get to that point, we can start thinking about some more cost-effective management options before it's that late. This is a picture of one of the harvest aid trials. So here's that horseweed, mare's tail, that's in the wheat. That's not probably one of the worst looking fields. I'm sure you've seen some fields that are worse than that. What's important about horseweed or mare's tail in Oklahoma and other states in our region is that many of our plants are herbicide resistant to both glyphosate and our ALS herbicides. So if we go back and we look at these treatments, here's Roundup, here's Ally, these are ALS and EPSP mode of action. So many of our biotypes are resistant. So when you walk out in a field and you see something like this, a completely necrotic dead plant next to a plant that's totally alive, If you feel pretty good about your application, that you calibrated, you got good coverage, you used the right rate, you didn't have any kind of application error, that's really what textbook herbicide resistance looks like. Having a living plant right next to a dead plant. So if you're seeing that with any weed species, and I'll talk at the very end about how you can send samples into our lab to test for resistance. That is what herbicide resistance often looks like. So not really an interesting map. If you have horseweed or mare's tail in your field, you probably have biotypes that are resistant to those two groups of modes of action. So Roundup again, ALS, Finesse, Gleam, those are all ALS herbicides. So if you're not getting kill like you once were, that's probably why. And you guys can interrupt me at any time. And yes?
Was that mare's tail? Wasn't that in every Bermuda grass pasture there was this summer? Is there some summers that it's more prominent than others?
So we do see it in our pastures as well. Depending on our crop cycle, we probably have horseweed biotypes that adapt. So if you're growing winter wheat, you can see flushes come up in the winter, but you also can see, if you're more of a summer crop producer, you can see populations start to come up and green up in the spring.
What do we do about that? That metal deal right there.
This weed?
Huh?
What do we do about it?
Yeah.
Or how do we kill it? We're getting there.
Forgive me.
So I'm going to talk about wheat data because that is my major crop, but some of these herbicides and modes are also labeled in pasture settings too. So I knew coming here that you guys are probably going to want more pasture from me than what I'm going to give you, so I apologize for that. But many of these products we can use across systems. So if we don't want to wait till our wheat is that late and go out with a product that's going to give us 50% control, because to me that's not good enough, then we probably should be thinking in season. And here's some really infested fields where, you know, we're not getting much out of that crop. So there's a lot of products here on the on this x-axis. The good news is that many of our synthetic auxins are still doing a good job controlling horseweed or mare's tail. So then you might be thinking, what are our synthetic auxins? These are our group 4 herbicides, so think 2,4-D, think dicamba, think MCPA. Those products are doing a pretty good job. Dicamba, of those 3, is doing the better job. But it's all about application timing. So anytime we use a synthetic auxin herbicide, it's not like Roundup where we're able to kill a 2-inch, 4-inch, and 8-inch weed, probably pretty similar if it's not resistant. With the auxins, weed size, whether it's how wide our rosette is on the ground or how tall it is, we're really hoping we're not going to get much greater than 4 inches. And I know that sounds really small, and you guys probably have a lot of ground to cover, but that is where we start to see a decrease in control. No matter the product, no matter the weed, if you're using a 2,4-D, a dicamba, MCPA, fluroxapyr, any herbicide where you see that 4 on the label, which means it's in that auxin family, we need to be targeting that 2 to 4 inch weed size, or we will see a decrease. Okay, well what if it gets wet? By the time I get in, I have rosettes or weeds that are 6 to 8 inches, right? Because that's life. There are some other things that we can do. We can tank mix some other products, but the price is going to go up. So this is in wheat. These are 4-inch horseweed rosettes. You can see that dicamba alone did a pretty good job, around 90% control. 2,4-D, 80%. So a little bit of a decrease. So if you want to bump it, you're going to have to pay for it. And then I highlighted these middle treatments. These middle treatments is a product that, if you are in the wheat world, that you may have heard. It's a product that is marketed and produced by Corteva, or which once was Dow AgroSciences, called Culex. It has 2 active ingredients in the jug. It's labeled in wheat, barley, and triticale, and it does a really good job on horseweed and mare's tail. And I can say that. I'm not selling it. I don't work for these companies, but we have several years of data. I had one master's student where this was really her job, was to look at what are the best treatments on horseweed or mare's tail. It's called Culex. Yeah. Cuelex. So here's Culex alone. It's doing a pretty good job, about 94% control. And then when we tank mix with some other auxins like dicamba 2,4-D, we're going to see a bump. Again, that's going to be a couple of dollars per acre to throw in those extra herbicides. Culex alone for just the product is around $5. So I know price is important. There are some other products that are newer. If you hear these names, Centralis is being marketed and sold by FMC. It's a little bit pricier. That's usually why I go to Culex for the recommendation. And then there's another product you might be hearing about called Talinor for broadleafs. That's being sold by Syngenta. I so far have not been very impressed with it. So, you know, they don't like it when I say that, but I just tell you guys what we see in the field. And I'm sure there's a fit, but for horseweed, it doesn't look like it's the best product. So that's 4-inch horseweeds. I also wanted to talk a little bit about this broadleaf, and we can talk about others if there's some that are on your mind. And does anyone ever see this rosette on the ground? Cutleaf Evening Primrose. Okay, good. So, started to do a little bit of work on this broadleaf in collaboration with a colleague at Mississippi State. And this is our 2nd year collecting some data. It does, I'm going to go back to the picture and then I'll show you the data. It does happen to be one of those broadleafs that's difficult to kill. If you have seen this in the field, Cutleaf Evening Primrose, it has a very waxy cuticle on it. When we have a leaf that is high water content, that has that waxy, almost kind of looks like a succulent, but it's not, it's difficult sometimes to get a herbicide droplet to penetrate into that plant. And so, yes, surfactants can be important, but we also just need to find the right active ingredient for these difficult to control weeds. They're not resistant, to my knowledge, in the state. They just don't respond well to herbicides. So that's important to keep in mind. We sometimes have plants that evolve in a field where we once could kill them, and now we cannot kill them, and that we call herbicide resistance. And then sometimes we just have plants that we never were able to kill well with herbicides. And that's where this plant kind of falls into that category. So I've started a couple of treatments that I like as far as price and efficacy go. So we can look, Culex again, it did a pretty good job. Some of the tank mixes, dicamba plus 2,4-D, price-wise, so this would be our Weed Master. It does a pretty good job. This is about 75% control, not perfect. These plants, application timing will be critical. These applications last year were made in December. This year I haven't gone out with treatment yet because we were really dry and the flush came a little bit later. Where I'm doing this treatment is at Lahoma. And so I'll probably go out in a few weeks. I didn't star these 2 treatments on the right. I think that was just an error on my part. So these also looked really good. Finesse plus dicamba and Finesse plus 2,4-D. I think I just stopped starring at some point is maybe what happened. Finesse also did a pretty good job. So Finesse, cereal, and fallow, or cereal and broadleaf, a product that we have liked quite a bit, I know, in the area. Still doing a good job on some of our broadleafs. Even though we have resistance on many of our grasses, our broadleafs, for most of them, it's still doing a good job. Yes.
And that's not a pre-emerge then? Or
It
is
has,
both?
it's both.
Okay.
Yeah. So most of our ALS herbicides, so these are all our products where we see a group 2 on the label, Finesse, Ally, Glean, they move in the phloem and the xylem of plants. So we can have kill on what's up and also residual. So you are correct. And so this trial was looking at once all the flush had come up. Yes.
You starred them because you liked the ones with the stars? Is that right?
I think I started starring and didn't star them, and stopped starring them. So yeah, these treatments were also really good. This is a very cost-effective one as well. I don't know what happened there. I must have got distracted. So yeah, any of the ones above 80% I think are pretty good treatments. Cost-wise, we know that we can put out Finesse for a couple of dollars per acre. So I think that looks good. What is the advantage over, let's say, Finesse plus QLEX plus 2,4-D? The one thing about some of these other treatments is they have more than one mode of action in the tank. So the way that these herbicides kill plants, Finesse is a group 2, it's an ALS inhibitor. In this tank mix, we have group 4s and group 2s. That is good for herbicide resistance management when you are making an application of a herbicide that kills the plant in more than one way. But your bottom line is important too, so if this is the one that makes sense, I understand, but we want to make sure maybe we're not making this application every year because we could start to select for resistance. So cost, company always get mad, they always get mad at me when I talk about cost. These are average costs. I understand there's incentives depending on what you're buying, but just to give you an idea, since we've talked about several products, I mentioned QLEX at $5 per acre. Whoops, is this a touch screen? Okay. QLEX at $5 per acre. Many of our ALS herbicides and auxins around $1 to $3 per acre just for the product. And then I mentioned Talinor didn't have the best fit for horseweed at $10 to $12 per acre. I'm obviously being pretty picky about that and how its control wasn't great. And then PowerFlex HL, $12 per acre. That was in some of the horseweed treatments. Why is that so expensive? Because we know we're getting grass control with that one as well. So PowerFlex typically is one of our go-to brome herbicides in wheat. Now, you guys will have to tell me, are there anyone in the room that are controlling grasses in their wheat? Okay, so I may skip the next part.
Well, I've got a problem with grasses in wheat that I wanted to address.
Okay. Okay, so maybe the question should be, is there anyone who is interested in controlling grasses in wheat? Yes. Okay. What are your key?
The elevator manager said it was a nutgrass that came in, and to give you a little background, the field the Roundup and Select was put on.
Okay.
It was completely clean. It was minimum tilled.
Okay.
And got a rain the day after it, late August.
Okay.
And I had everything come in that field. Pigweeds, controlled the pigweeds, really smoked them with MCP and Finesse.
Okay.
Completely took those out, and
Okay.
I had a call of the nutgrass.
Okay. So
That came. I've never had a problem with it before. It literally killed wheat. It came so
Is
thick.
that the same as that sage?
Yeah. So it's a sedge. So it's not really a grass. It's not really a broadleaf. It's a sedge. So we may have to talk after, towards the end of the presentation, about some options. I don't have any data on sedges. I'll quickly go. I missed it. What did you say?
Just don't tell me to get the one class, okay?
So you're out of luck.
Okay. You're no-till.
No, minimum till.
Minimum till. Okay. Okay.
And this year, it was so dry and hard, it was very minimum till.
Okay. Okay. So what about, I'm just gonna ask you guys before I move into this next set, what about Italian ryegrass, bromes, feral rye?
It's in there.
That's forage. We're not controlling it.
Not a problem.
Correct?
I encourage you.
Okay. So I will go through this next part quickly.
It's here.
The next thing I was going to talk about was ryegrass. So everyone's probably thinking that's a forage, and I don't care what she's saying. There's a couple of take-home messages that I think are still applicable. I'm going to come back. I want to go to this slide first. So I've been screening for Italian ryegrass resistance for several years, and thanks to your educators in Caddo and Grady County, we were able to identify some Italian ryegrass that is resistant to a product called Axial XL. Axial XL is in the same mode of action as your Select, Assure 2. They're ACCase inhibitors. So if you come across plants where maybe now we're talking, if you guys aren't killing ryegrass in wheat, maybe burn down situations, and you're using an ACCase inhibitor and you're not seeing kill, this is probably why. You do have herbicide resistant ryegrass in the region. So I just wanted to bring that up. I'll quickly talk about what we're doing to control it in wheat. Basically, because in many of our fields, especially here with what I just told you, since Axial, we're not seeing the best control. In this field we were because they weren't resistant, but we are having issues in other fields. We're using pre-emergence herbicides. The main three products we're using are called Zidua, Axiom, which you know has been around for a while, and then Anthem Flex. And I started doing some work with Jason Warren in Stillwater, Perkins area, just looking at the impact of tillage on pre-emergence herbicides. So even if you don't care about ryegrass management, you still might be using pre's in some of your systems. And so far, what we're seeing, and this is only a year and a half worth of data, so I'd like to collect some more. If you are using pre-emergence herbicides, so these are products that you are applying before your weeds have germinated, rainfall, rainfall, rainfall is incredibly important. We know that, right? We have to get them incorporated. If you look on the back of many pre-emergence products, it will say something like, you need to have less than 30% ground cover so that you don't have tie-up with that product. Or you need to use a carrier volume of 15 gallons per acre. Those are things that you hear just to ensure that you have coverage and you don't get herbicide tie-up and residue. And so all this study was doing was looking at how much residue on the ground makes an impact on the success of weed control. And again, so far, residue hasn't been as important as I thought it would be. We're typically going out with 15 gallons per acre, so a decent carrier volume, but rainfall seems to matter a whole lot more than the residue. So in 2016, when we had very timely rains, at least for the wheat season, I planted around the 12th, made an application on the 19th. So my goal was, Sorry, I can't get used to that. My goal was before, sorry guys. My goal was before the ryegrass came up, 1 inch of rain after application. Something like that is perfect for a pre-emergence herbicide. You make your application, you get 1 inch of rain, your herbicide moves with your water into the soil where your weed seeds are. This is when pre's don't work. So if anyone's ever told you to use a pre-emergence herbicide and you're like, nope, I've used them, I hate them, I like spraying my weeds when they're up, and a lot of us say that, and this is kind of why. Because if you got caught in maybe a dry year, so here I made an application. Obviously I made my application too late. I should have applied right before that rain and I missed it. Then the next time I saw any kind of rain, and it wasn't much, was 7 weeks after application. By that time, your weeds have germinated, your herbicide is starting to break down, and you're now gonna say you hate this product. But that is kind of some of the story behind it. Okay, so I'm not going to spend much time on grass. I think I'm going to move into some of the data we did on Johnson grass. Does that sound good? The only other thing I might mention is you might be starting to hear about this wheat called coaxium. Is anyone hearing about this new herbicide-tolerant wheat? Okay, so if you do hear about it and someone's trying to sell it to you, I'll tell you a little bit about it quickly. So we all know what Clearfield wheat is, right? We have double stop, a variety that we like quite a bit in Oklahoma. Good for grain, good for forage. For the first time in over a decade, we now have another herbicide-tolerant wheat that is available that you might start to hear about. It's called coaxium wheat. And basically it allows you to use one of those ACCase inhibitors over the top of wheat. So now we're talking about that same mode of action, our select, assure, over the top of wheat to kill grasses. But you guys don't hear about pest control in wheat, so we're gonna keep moving. But if you do hear about it, that is what that technology is. You're gonna have to pay for it, just like Clearfield. You pay for the seed, you pay for the product. Does it make a lot of sense in low price years? I don't know how people are paying for it, but just in case you hear about it, I wanted you to know. Mostly folks will be using it to control plants like this, rescue grass and feral rye.
But cheap.
It is a brome, yes. So anytime I say brome, I'm mostly thinking about, in Oklahoma we have 4 bromes that are pretty prevalent. Downy brome, which is that one with the really fuzzy head that kind of turns red at the end of the season. We have Japanese brome, true cheat, and then rescue grass. Rescue grass is the only brome that is very smooth, and it has this seed head that is flat. You can kind of pinch between your fingers. It's very two-dimensional. And this is very, very hard to kill. So in the wheat world, these new systems will help. Really, I tell folks, it's so expensive to pay for the kill of these 2 plants, the best thing you can do is rotate out. Or plant late, because this plant right here is the very first grass that comes up in the winter. And so one strategy is delaying our planting date by a couple of weeks, which forage folks never want to hear. So this is just some of the data on the rescue grass control. I'm working with Gary Strickland and Altus. Rescue grass is a big problem all over the state, but especially in the Southwest. Okay, so if we're okay on time, are we okay on time? I will quickly just go over a little bit of what we learned with Johnson grass management in Bermuda. Again, I don't call myself a pasture person. Alex Rocatelli is our forage specialist. And we started doing a little bit of work with Johnson grass management, and then also looking at Bermuda tolerance to glyphosate or Roundup, which I'm not going to show much of that data, but we can talk about it. Is anyone using glyphosate over the top of Bermuda grass that is greened up?
Yeah, March 1.
Okay, so I'm not going to say her off label if anyone's nervous about that. If you look at a Roundup, Power Max, Weather Max, whatever label, it is pretty vague about whether or not you can use glyphosate at low rates in Bermuda grass. When I talk to Monsanto, now Bayer reps, and I kind of ask them, hey, what's the deal with this label? They tell me, yes, it is permissible. If you look at Power Max, it says 8 to 11 fluid ounces per acre are labeled for use in Bermuda. And if you happen to go out when Bermuda grass is at green up, you can do it. You may see some injury, obviously. So we played around a little bit with using some lower rates. If you've ever had Brian Pugh, who's our Northeast area guy, or even he does some forage work, maybe you've seen some of their data looking at low rates for like sandbird control. This was for Johnson grass. So I don't have to tell you all what Johnson grass is. Basically, we did a few trials in 17 and here and in Stillwater, looking at applications of a few herbicides before cutting, in our case mowing, and then after to see how important application timing was. If you look at many of these products and you look at the Johnson grass control section, you've maybe noticed that many of them say make an application when Johnson grass is 8 to 12 inches tall, 12 to 16 inches. Have any of you guys seen that? Do we know why they tell us to do that? So I talked earlier about 2 to 4 inches is the time we want, but then we have some products that say we want 10 to 12 inches. And the reason for that is so that we can have translocation of that herbicide below ground to those rhizomes where we keep having shoots come up. When we make an application when Johnson grass is starting to change from vegetative growth to reproductive growth, it's starting to send some of its energy below ground. So if we can make an application when it's a little bit taller, we can have more movement to the rhizomes. That's why they tell you to make the application at that time. So these were the products we were looking at. Outrider, sulfosulfuron, it's also an ALS. Pastora, which is nicosulfuron and metsulfuron, all ALS herbicides, so these are group 2s. All that means is they kill a plant in the same way. Panoramic, which also we call Plateau. Now the product that's supposed to be used is Panoramic, Amazopic, which maybe you don't like because we do see pretty high injury to Bermuda grass when we apply it. And then we played around with Roundup Power Max at 8 fluid ounces per acre. And this would be after green up, once we have Johnson grass in that 1 to 1.5 foot stage. And so that would be the lower end of what the label allows. So they were applied prior to cutting in early June and after cutting in early July. So this is visual Johnson grass control 2 months after application. You'll see that Pastora, Outrider, Panoramic, Roundup, all of these products where we did an initial cutting and then made an application were pretty effective. I think that timing had less to do with the cutting and more to do with when we had rains in the area. Panoramic, regardless of timing, was a pretty good treatment, which we have called Plateau in the past, but I will show you the injury And really, you ended up not liking that treatment very much because of how much Bermuda grass injury there were. Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
I may be kind of ignorant.
No.
What's wrong with Johnson grass if you're cowman and just pasture?
Yeah, so nothing. So here's just mow or cut.
Harvest with bath,
Yeah.
pearly whites.
Yeah, well, in this field we didn't have pearly whites, but we're basically simulating grazing. So nothing. If you're managing it that way, we know that cattle selectively graze and like Johnson grass, and you're not worried about toxicity, have never had issues in the past, then nothing's wrong with that. So this would be, hey, I need something more. I want an additional tool.
If it'll control or give some control on Johnson grass, wouldn't it give some control on grass burgers?
On sandburs, I have done little to no work with sandburs. I don't know many things that will provide control for sandburs, to be totally honest. We do have some herbicides that are effective. As far as what grazing is bringing to the table, I'm not going to pretend like I know, because I don't. If you think you're seeing a difference, then that's great. One problem that we can have with a lot of the sandbirds is just the dormancy period on those seeds, and where you think you have control, but really our seed bank has been dormant, and we have flushes that come later that we didn't know that were going to come.
That's what happened this year. With the late rains, we had a big flush of sandbirds come in.
At an abnormal kind of time?
Yeah. But can you use Prowl H2O? Because it does a good job of
You can, yes.
pre-emerging and killing them. It
Yes.
doesn't kill them, but it just pre-emerges.
And it is expensive, yes. I want to say off the top of my head, it's not a product that I love, but because there aren't very many products for sandbur, for pre-emergent control, it can be a tool. I want to say off the top of my head, like $20 per acre. It's pretty expensive, depending on what rate you use. I think I have one of Brian's sandbur slides with prices. I'll bring it up. We're almost done, and then I'll bring it up if we have time. And you can tell me now if we don't.
We're good.
Okay.
We have 15 minutes.
Okay.
Joe Bob, I just want to clarify that there are toxicity issues for cattle with Johnson grass. I wanted to make sure that's not what you were asking. There are, yeah.
In the fall, right? Is that
Yeah,
toxicity in the
well,
fall?
under stress.
Drought, yeah.
After Johnson grass is
So
not
in
too
the-
stress.
So drought or
In the
freeze
West
or
West, they don't get as much rain, so they worry a lot about the
Yeah,
summer
don't have
months
enough
when it's
water.
really dry. And then I know somebody here that lost 4 head to this year. So, but you just gotta watch when you turn something in.
Yeah, you're correct.
I haven't figured that out though. Is it, when it's really stressed, I always thought it was, you get a rain on it and about 5 days after that rains when it's really toxic.
Well, it's after it's been stressed and it's the new growth in. And OSU has a fact sheet on it as well. So, but if you're cutting it from there, there's no issue to prussic acid, will evaporate off, but there is still nitrate issues. Sorry, I just.
No, you don't have to say sorry at all. Yeah, I think so. Alex has a fact sheet. I agree that it is new growth. It seems to be new growth recovering from stress, and it could be temperature or drought dependent from what I have learned. But I'm not a forage person. Alex has a fact sheet, and then Alex and I also have a fact sheet highlighting some of these management options. But I think what you were asking was, seems like you're not having toxicity issues now that you know of, and you're getting control of your Johnson grass.
I mean, they like it. I was just wondering, does Johnson grass take too much, room for Bermuda grass? Does it override the Bermuda
If
grass?
it gets too thick, it can shade it out, kill it.
But
It's gotta
if I'm
get-
pasturing it, it's not gonna happen.
No.
So I think one thing to think about would be that those underground production of those rhizomes, and you can deplete the underground rhizomes with grazing, but it's going to be a lot slower. You need hard grazing to deplete them enough. So this is maybe someone who says, hey, I want 95% control in 2 weeks. What can I do? Here are some options.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you seen any resistance to,
Roundup?
I gotta get out.
That's a good question. So there have been reports in the Tipton Altus area that there's resistance. They sent me seed. The seed that I got, I could not get to germinate. I need to go back to that field and collect some more seed. I don't think we actually have resistance. I think what we're seeing a lot of the times is we make a Roundup application and then we see a new shoot come up from a rhizome and we think it's resistance. I even double checked last night to see if there were any cases in the US. There is one case in California in orchards. But in our other fields, in our region, there aren't. So right now I'm thinking no.
that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, it is good. So if you do go out and you see, oh my gosh, there's green, again, I just sprayed. Unfortunately, that's the nature of rhizomes. They suck and you have another shoot that came up, probably. Okay, I think this, no, what I did here.
Just
I think the battery, yeah, I'll just use this mouse, we'll be good, I only have a couple more. So this is Johnson grass dry biomass, looking at the same treatments in pounds per acre. This is 2 months after application. And then what I wanted, is a little bit of foxtail control data, just because we happen to have foxtail in the field at Chickasha. This is yellow foxtail, so I decided to rate it as well. Many of the treatments were fairly effective, so that's good news. And then I wanted to get to this. So this is 1 month after application. This is visual Bermuda grass injury. So here's some of our treatments that looked pretty good, but look at the injury that we're seeing 1 month after application. So something to think about. When you have a problem like a sand burr, some folks are willing to take this level of Roundup injury because we just don't have a lot of other tools.
That's with your 8 ounce, right?
That's 8. That's 8 fluid ounces.
Kevin Whitney is a sprayer and he recommends a low dose glyphosate for sand burrs.
How low?
I'm not sure off the top of my head,
Yeah.
but early in the year, and he said he's had fairly good luck with it. We're gonna try it this year. I had used Pasteur on one pasture in the past and it did real good for several years.
Good.
And it's coming back.
And then actually I wanted to mention, and I'm glad you brought that up, if you look at the Pastora label, and I know it's not a cheap product,
No, it's not.
but if you look at it, it is permissible to tank mix it with low rates of glyphosate, lower than this. That is on label. That I like. What makes me a little bit nervous are the very low rates of glyphosate alone. And the reason,
It was gonna be tank mixed with something else too, so.
okay. And I mean, if folks are using the pretty low rates alone, I mean, that's their choice. What makes me nervous is herbicide resistance. If we're going out with glyphosate at 4 fluid ounces per acre in our field, I really don't want Oklahoma to be the first state that has sand burr resistant to Roundup. And I think we could do that if we abuse that application. So,
What time of the year are we talking about? Are we talking about anytime
so
in the spring or summer? Or?
So for this, these were June applications and July. We played around with both. And then I'll see if we have a minute and I can pull up that sand burr slide.
What?
I got you.
May.
Oh,
I got
you
you
got,
fixed.
oh, thank you, okay. Okay, so almost done here. The other thing that I would mention is we have been doing more rope wicking. If you want to use glyphosate on something like Johnson grass, sandbur, probably, you know, we have to have the height difference, but rope wicking can also be an effective strategy if you have a weed that's above your Bermuda grass crop.
How much do you put, you just put solid Roundup in a rope wicker?
No. So, well, I'm not saying that you cannot. So I'm trying to think of the ratio that I last used. I think I did 33%, so a third. A third Roundup. And basically what you want is something that when you're going on hillsides isn't dripping onto plants. You kind of want to get the right viscosity, I guess is the word I'm looking for. So a third is what I've been playing around with. But you'll have to mix and, you know, once you fill up your sponge, your wick, whatever it is, I wait a few minutes. Mine have wicks on it, and I just kind of let the wicks get concentrated. I put some gloves on and make sure that they're wet and they're not dripping. It's not like the most scientific thing, but it does a good job. Last year we did some strips at Chickasha. We didn't show them at the field day because it was so wet that we couldn't get back there. You remember that? The other thing that I would say that helps with rope wicking that I've seen is pass direction. So let's say you don't want to fill up your whole tube and you go a third. Offsetting and wiping this way and then wiping this way can be good because it's all about contact.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just some other research that we're doing in the program. I did want to mention if you do think you have a plant that's herbicide resistant, which I always discuss, it's a free service to anyone in the state of Oklahoma that you can send in seed to our lab and we can screen for the products you're interested in and tell you if there's resistance or not. If you're worried about collecting seed or aren't sure how to collect seed off a plant, we can send a student out. Just get in touch with your educator and let us know, or you guys can relay the message and we can come out and help with seed. Typically, a couple teaspoons of seed is enough to do what we need to test for herbicide resistance. So there's my contact information, and I was gonna see if I could find that sandbur slide. Might have to ask Ryan to come out at some point to talk about sandbur control because he's a real pastor.
Is finesse approved?
In pasture,
Bermuda.
so I think you still have different trade names. So like metsulfuron is now off patent and it's generic. So I think what most of the pasture folks is it plotter?
It's the ally.
That's the ally. So that's the metsulfuron. So there are different trade names for the system, and at least
Finesse used to not be approved for Bermuda grass, but it's for weed, of course. But it did a good job in Bermuda.
what would be the generic chlorsulfuron? Is there in Bermuda to make that mixture?
I'm not familiar with the generic.
Okay.
The only one I know of is the ally.
Okay.
We used to use it in the sod farm, but it's actually a root pruner, so I can't use it anymore. It prunes the roots of your Bermuda grass.
Okay.
But when you're
Let
under
me
pasture,
see.
it doesn't really matter.
So finesse is metsulfuron and chlorsulfuron. That's why I was asking. It's two active ingredients. So I was just trying to think, well, if plotter's in label, how can we just mix the two together? So I'll have to see I don't know what off-patent chlorsulfuron is. Okay, so let me see. This is what I was looking for. I don't know if he has.
Yep, no control.
So I don't think this data, I don't know exactly how new this is, but I know when Brian talks about sandworm control, I stole this slide from him. And this is what he's seeing. So this is 36 days after treatment. Pre-emergent treatments were rated 119 days after treatment. And then this is forage. So this is yield loss caused by post-emergent sandworm control. So you can see he played around with some lower Roundup rates. And I know that he will tell you he really liked the 6 fluid ounces.
Okay.
That is off-label. So I would like to see it tank mixed with something like Pastora or another active ingredient if you're going to go lower.
What's the cost of Pastora these days?
It's high.
It's
Yeah.
gone up from what I use.
So I guess what to me would be the happy medium, but it's not my ground, so you get to make the decision that's best for you.
Yeah. It's almost,
It'd be $15 to $20 an acre.
I think it used to be $12 to $15 is what I used it, but we had, cows couldn't even get down to the grass, and it controlled it, but,
Yeah.
it's gone up way high since then, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say around 20, and I obviously he played around with the
If you get up
one.
to 1.5 ounces, then you really,
Oh, yeah.
I'm pretty sure the Prowl is less expensive.
Really? I don't know. I think both
Or
of
one
them
of the
depend on
fact
the
sheet.
rate.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what,
Against the fence, yeah.
I know Prowl each is what he recommended.
Fertilizer.
So, hi. You want me to go? Bye. So maybe at some point Brian could come out and do a Stamber talk and give you guys some better information on that than I can. I guess talking about Pastora, 6 ounces, herbicide resistant, off the top of my head, what I'm thinking is if it doesn't make sense to pay for that Pastora and you want to use the Roundup alone, I would like to see at least to go to 8 fluid ounces. And you are going to see some injury. It will recover. You're going to see some injury. You're going to see some good control. But hopefully we're not selecting for resistance. And I think Brian will maybe tell you something. I don't know. Maybe he'll tell you really like 6. I don't know.
So you like Roundup and
A-
Roundup and
Yeah, I mean, those 2 modes of action are nice for resistance management. It's not cheap. And if you are going to go out with the Roundup alone, the on-label rate would be 8 fluid ounces. And that's of a 4.5 pound formulation. So it'll be even higher if you're using like a 3 pound. So you have to look at the label. That's for Power Max. So one of the more.
What's the advantage of tank mixing if you're getting 100% control with Pastora?
Yeah, if you go out with the Pastora and you don't want to put in the Power Max, that's fine. Folks have been seeing, and again, Brian has this data, that they're just seeing more broad spectrum control of other species that might be in the field. So you don't have to put it in your Pastora. If you're already paying that much and you don't want to put in an additional, you do not have to.
How important is your water?
Water
Test your
hardness?
water? Yeah.
So for some herbicides, water hardness is very important. The one herbicide that comes to mind that we like to use a lot is Roundup. Water hardness is very important if you're using Roundup. So If you have calcium, magnesium in your water, what I would do, the cheapest thing you can do is put ammonium sulfate in before you put your product in. Fill up your tank halfway, put some ammonium sulfate in, put in your Roundup, top it off. A lot of folks like using liquid AMS, just I think because it's easier to mix. I still use dry, it's a lot cheaper. There's a lot of water conditioners that folks will try to sell you that are pH buffers and this and that. AMS does a good job and it's the cheapest, so that's what I use.
And that's mainly for Roundup.
Yeah, there's some other Roundup, I think, as far as this conversation, would be the more important one where we know Roundup can get tied up to our salts. And so it is one of the more important
I filled
ones.
up out of the well water and I've got poor results, and I filled up out of rural water and it's a lot better.
Yeah, and that's not your mind playing a trick on you. That's real. What were you spraying glyphosate? Yeah, yeah, that's very much real.
Because it locks up all the molecules in there or something.
Yeah, so what happens is exactly what you're saying is when you put the glyphosate in the tank, there are many sites on a Roundup molecule that have negative sites. Calcium, magnesium, those are all positive charges. So it binds to the negative sites, and then that new molecule that we have isn't uptake very well, basically. So what the AMS does is the AMS binds to the salts instead of your Roundup binding to the salts. So yeah, you're 100% correct.
Hard not to get it.
But somebody told me that all that hard water's just like a stupid.
Yeah.
Make it stay on the plant good.
From what I've gleaned from this, I've got a giant foxtail problem, the yellow foxtail that you.
Okay.
And, you know, have had it under control the last few years, and then we had all this rain in the spring, and evidently that brought it on. Not a lot you can do about that, except for Pastora if you want to spend the money.
And when Brian comes out here, whenever you guys get a weed control talk from him, because when you asked about why add in the glyphosate with the Pastora, at least for the sandbur control, I know he has foxtail data showing that that addition has been very helpful on the foxtails. So I don't have that data, but I think he'd be more than happy to share it with you. Any other questions? So I guess I need to do some more pasture work until you guys invite me out here, right? And less wheat work. Less grass control work in wheat. Okay, I'll work on it.